And the ongoing debate over artificial intelligence, there's both excitement and uncertainty about its impact on public life. But do we sometimes lose sight of the vast array of benefits this new technology can provide?
And we also think about AI and culture and technology and culture a lot too. How musicians are using it, how creatives are going to use it in ways that people like, and how different people feel comfortable using it. And we also want to make sure that when regulations come into play, that they make sense, they foster safety, and they accomplish their jobs, and they're just not unnecessary barriers.
This week, we dive into some of the positive uses of AI in work and personal life, as well as advice for policymakers who might be wondering whether and how to regulate AI. This is Defending Ideas. Defending Ideas is a weekly podcast produced by Sutherland Institute. On this show, we are committed to renewing the principles of common sense conservatism, making you a better champion of sound ideas. Welcome back to another episode of Defending Ideas. I'm your host, Nic Dunn, and my guest this week is Shoshana Weissmann. She is the Digital Director and Policy Advisor for the Abundance Institute. Shoshana, welcome to Defending Ideas.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you because the issues of AI and technology and sometimes data centers, and there's a lot of stuff related to these topics that's been in debate and in the news in recent months. And especially with the advent of AI kind of having a significant impact on our policy debates, on the way we work, the way we kind of live our daily lives. So I want to give our audience some of your perspectives and talk about some of the work you've done and the work Abundance Institute does on these issues, because they're really important to get right as we look to the future. So maybe to start off, would you just introduce our audience to yourself and to Abundance Institute for those who may not be familiar?
Sure. So I've been nerding in regulatory policy for a while, and I really like it more than I think anyone should. I used to do a lot of occupational licensing reform. I moved on to social media regulation and age verification, and now I'm doing a lot with AI policy. And I'm really passionate about it because I use it a lot in my own life, but I love watching the way other people use it. And at the Abundance Institute, we're actually based in Utah mostly, which I love because I love Utah. I love hiking the Wasatch. I'm a big Wasatch person. I have hiked the heck out of Big and Little Cottonwood Canyons, and will do that all the time. I've actually finished like a ridiculous amount of trails there, and got some hiking in when I got to visit Abundance recently. So I can go on forever about how much I love Utah. Everything about it's great. And I love working at a place where I get to go there a bunch. But the Abundance Institute focuses on positive tech, like figuring out how we can use AI to help people, how we can get more AI, how we can have America and our principles lead AI. And also for energy policy, we do a lot about energy leadership. We love Governor Cox's efforts with Operation Gigawatt. We're big nerds for nuclear and geothermal and all of that, and better grids. And we also think about AI and culture and technology and culture a lot too. How musicians are using it, how creatives are going to use it in ways that people like, and how different people feel comfortable using it. And we also want to make sure that when regulations come into play, that they make sense, they foster safety, and they accomplish their jobs, and they're just not unnecessary barriers. So coming back to my love of regulatory reform. So I've been here about 8 months, and it's a really fun place to work.
And it sounds like, and I will echo your sentiments about Utah being a great place, and the hiking and riding and camping and just all of the outdoor kinds of things you can do here. And from a governance standpoint, there's a lot of things we do really well in Utah. And I think some of the conversations around tech policy and AI have obviously touched on things happening here in Utah as well that we've talked about previously on the show. And maybe kind of another general question, because you touched on it a little bit. I want to sort of speak to those folks out there who, you might have some in our audience who are very excited and optimistic about AI. You might have some who are very worried about it and the effect that they might fear it could have on work, on culture, on daily life, and maybe have folks that have sort of some of those mixed feelings or aren't really sure what to think. So maybe first, what would you say to any of those folks out there that either have strong opinions one way or the other, or still trying to make sense of this new technology that seems to have come about quite quickly? Where do you stand on excited, worried, a little bit of both? What should our audience know?
I definitely have a little bit of worry, but I'm mostly really excited. And it's funny too, because I think like everyone, I wasn't really thinking about AI until ChatGPT happened. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Like I can play around with this. And I think it was, I might be wrong, but I think it was like Hugging Face when you could make like silly images. Like that was the original use of it. Like Rick and Morty nativity scene and silly things like that. There were lots of opportunities. But it's funny because for years I've done a lot of automation. And I think when people think AI, they think automation. But automation was already a thing. This tool I use called Zapier already automated lots of workflows. And you can do this, like if you know how to code, if you're really good with Python, you can do this on your own. I'm not really good with coding. So having a tool that lets me automate with different modules that make it really easy and say like, if this happens in like Google Sheets, then send an email or add a bunch of steps in between and reformat some stuff. It's a really useful tool. But I think when people think about AI, they're thinking about that. And that stuff was already happening and was already really common. So and not to say that AI doesn't play in, but I think some of the automation concerns, like we've had this technology and it hasn't automated away jobs. It tends to change jobs over time, sometimes, unfortunately, in ways we won't be able to predict, which can be really difficult for people to adjust to if they don't know what to be prepared for, understandably. But on top of that, AI, it's doing more. Like agents are able to do things that sometimes code couldn't do, or sometimes Zapier couldn't do. And I'm using agents a little bit, but I don't know anyone who's using AI and automation and automating people away. Like it's usually expanding capacity. I always have so much on my plate and there's never a shortage of stuff to do. And I think most people in the workforce tend to feel that way, that there's always more they'd like to be doing. So, and studies have started to show that AI and automation is more about building capacity and expanding rather than shrinking. Like if a business wants to do more cool stuff, when they get that automation capability, they're not going to let people go. They're going to say, great, you guys are going to work with us to automate more and we're going to take care of more things and we're going to do more things. So I think there's a lot of really exciting opportunity there, but there's also the very real difficulty that the workforce doesn't always know how to adapt because we don't know where AI and automation are going to do their best work for people. So there's going to be some figuring that out. And then in your personal life, like I use AI so much for medicine. I have so many health issues, which we can get into. And it's been just such a godsend for me. Like I wish I had this when I was a teenager and going through diagnoses. It would have made my life totally different. There's even a rabbi I know who's working to use AI to help people illuminate new information from the Torah, which I think is a really cool use. Especially it's funny because I actually think there's a lot of cool potential when it comes to religion and putting pieces together that maybe people weren't thinking about and applying new knowledge. And then even when it comes to parenting or personal advice, I've been shocked how many people I know have used AI to give them insights about their own marriage and make it better and like come together with their partner and say things that they hadn't before. I think there's some really, really great potential here. Not to say that there's not big questions and, other concerns, but there's a lot of really cool opportunity that I'm really excited about.
I do want to talk about some of those specifics. But first, I heard this metaphor, and to be honest, I can't remember where I heard it. So wherever it's from, that thing gets all the credit for it. So apologies for not recalling the source. But the metaphor is that the advent of AI is kind of like those moving floors in airports. That the folks who use those and just stand on them to carry them to the next gate versus the folks who use those and walk on them to become more efficient and effective. And it's kind of maybe a simple metaphor. But when there's a lot of concern about, okay, is AI going to replace me in my work, or is it going to augment me in what I do and equip me to do it better and faster and more effectively and more efficiently, or do more things? So I like that metaphor. And in fact, when I've traveled recently, that metaphor comes to mind every time. Like, I want to be the person who walks while on the moving walkway so that I get that efficiency gain. How does that metaphor strike you, and how would you apply that to the overall conversation about AI, especially in the workforce?
Oh, I love that. I think that's a perfect analogy. An example is I could totally use AI to say, write social copy for me, write an email for me. That would do all right. But what's better is if I use AI for data matching. So like when we get new contacts, I match it to different systems. Like we have a couple of different databases and I want to make sure everything matches. But sometimes like it might be like, I'll use Representative Mike Kennedy. Instead of Mike Kennedy, it might be Michael Kennedy or Representative Michael Kennedy, different variations. But And with simple variations, you can use Python to accomplish that. But it's with so many variations with misspellings, it's going to be a lot easier to have an AI module do that. So for data matching, you can like upgrade your workflows a lot and make it easier and automate processes like new contacts uploaded and matched to systems. So if you want to just update it instead of create a duplicate, things like that. Or if you wanted to summarize information for you so you can like go use that later on and have an automated process do that for you, that can help a lot. I think walking on it is the perfect example, but standing on it is a lot like just kind of, using AI to only write your emails and to not even like write it in your tone, or to review information for you and not really review what it puts out or review the core parts of the information. Like when I read legislation, I read it, but sometimes I'll have AI go in and say like, okay, what part should I be looking at that I might be missing? And I think most of the time with those kinds of tasks, I'm already pretty much there. But every now and then I'm like, oh, wait, I totally missed that. I'm so glad that AI caught that for me. So you can really use it to level up in that way, whether it's automated or whether it's just like you doing one-off processes. Or for our website, I have a little AI module that just creates graphics for us. And it's just really, really simple graphics in our style. And it does a great job with it. But I still like go in and fine tune it and make sure everything looks like I want it to. But it does save me a lot of time. And like that's as opposed to going into a new chat each time and being like, make me an image like this, rather than giving it the training examples and things like that. But there's so many cool things you can do with it in your personal life too. I actually use it so hard for all trails. So when I go hiking, I want my AI bit to know the kind of trails I like. Like I love alpine lakes. I love marmots. Actually my necklace is a marmot. I had this custom made because I'm a dork for marmots, mountain goats. So I tell it, these are the things I want: sharp gray peaks, like very Wasatch type stuff. And then it'll go through all trails and find me trails in an area I'm thinking about and pull those out, as opposed to like find me alpine trails. Like you can really go about it in very different ways like that.
I love that broad scope of the uses of AI, and I want to talk a little bit more about some of those uses, and specifically in the area of medicine that you mentioned. We'll also get to technology governance and infrastructure. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, more on this with Shoshana Weissmann from the Abundance Institute. This is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sutherland Institute is an independent, nonprofit public policy think tank based in Salt Lake City, Utah. Our mission is to defend the principles of the American founding and to strengthen the institutions of civil society essential for those principles to endure. Sutherland provides research, events, and multimedia to policymakers and the public to promote the principles of faith, family, freedom, opportunity, and responsibility. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I'm Nic Dunn. We're going to continue our conversation with Shoshana Weissmann from the Abundance Institute. But first, I want to remind you, if you like what you're hearing today, please visit us at defendingideas.org. You can find this and previous conversations and short clips that you can use on your own social media platforms. And make sure to subscribe to Defending Ideas. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get your shows. Just search for Defending Ideas and click subscribe. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell icon in the corner of your screen so you can get notified each time a new episode drops, which is every Tuesday morning. Again, all that and more wherever you get your shows or at defendingideas.org. Shoshana, you mentioned something in the first segment that kind of talking through the various day-to-day uses of AI. You mentioned it's been particularly helpful in your personal life when it comes to navigating medical care. And I wanted to ask, what has your experience been in that space, whatever you're comfortable sharing, as an example of, well, it's not just work and it's not just silly fun stuff. There's some significant personal benefits to AI if used properly.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm happy to get into just every little bit of my medical history. I basically tweeted out every medical thing that has ever happened to me, in part because other people come back and share their own stories, and sometimes I'm able to help them. So I love sharing. But, I've had endometriosis and fibromyalgia and Crohn's disease and PCOS and insulin resistance and EDS and a bunch of other things. And it took years to get the diagnoses. But the way AI works, oh my gosh, I'm just blown away. So in the past couple of years, I have this really amazing doctor, and I'm so lucky to have him. He fixed my fibromyalgia. It turns out it was caused by heavy metal poisoning. And he was the first doctor maybe 20 years after I got that poisoning to check for it and found it, and then he treated it. And one of the cool things about that is that I was able to get off the med that I was taking for fibromyalgia. It was an SNRI. Like, if you know, SSRIs for depression, SNRIs just work on another neurotransmitter along with serotonin. And low serotonin, according to science, it doesn't cause depression, but it does cause low immunity. But also raising it can help fight depression. It's a really interesting neurochemical balance. But I knew that it was hard to get off of it, but I started having like these terrible feelings, and I'm like, something's wrong. Like, I don't know if this was covering up depression all these years, or if it's withdrawal from the drug, if I'm going through a withdrawal, which I knew existed, or if it was this tough life situation I was going through. So I went to different psychiatrists, and they were not helpful. They weren't listening. They were just throwing more meds at me. And I'm like, you're not, figuring this out with me. And then I met one, and she's like, look, I think you have bipolar 3, which is called cyclothymia, because you talk fast and you're depressed. But that's not the diagnostic criteria, as I later found out. But she was like, look, give this med a chance. No harm done. If it doesn't work, we'll just try on something else. Well, that med had really, really, really bad effects. And I thought I was like getting worse. And then I turned to ChatGPT. I wasn't even thinking that it was the med's fault. So I don't think I'd even told it about the med, but I was working through with it. And then after I found out this psychiatrist had actually made up a false medical history for me, I went to a new one and, gave her all the information and told her, like, I'm open-minded. I just want to see what you think. And she's like, no, you don't have bipolar 3. These are not the symptoms, but you do have depression. So like, let's get you off this med and back on the one that you had been on at a lower dose. So when she cut the med I was on, the new one, in half, my body exploded. It was already really bad, but I finally realized, oh my gosh, these new crazy symptoms were caused by this medication. The thing is, your body has neuroadaptation. So all that means is, like, if you take a medicine to increase a neurotransmitter, your body will downregulate the receptors, so your body will get less of it. And if you block receptors, your body will create more receptors. So it creates this imbalance, which creates withdrawal symptoms. So after going through withdrawal with that other med, I was going through it with this one. The problem was I didn't know how to get off of it. And the psychiatrist I was seeing had no idea and thought that withdrawal could only last 10 days. In comes ChatGPT. I feed it all the information I have. And it's like, look, if that was too fast for you, look into hyperbolic tapering, which is a taper where each next dose reduction is a percentage of the last dose, because this gets really dorky. But the way, think of it like pouring sugar on a table. Like, if you pour sugar on a table, first it's like a big spot there. And then as you pour more and more, it expands, but kind of less and less. That's how medicine occupies your brain receptors, like a lot at first and then less and less over time. So it basically said you have to like make the taper slower and slower over time by doing it like in a hyperbolic curve. And it showed me some research. So I dug in. I'm like, all right, I found this study showing brain occupancies of this drug on the neurotransmitter. And I'm like, make me a curve. Show me the curve for every 0.5 milligrams of this dose and show me what that looks like. And it made it. And now I had a plan of how to taper. I'm like, okay, I cut by half. That was way too fast. What if I did 10% or 20%? So I cut by 20% and I was fine. And I found out my body could handle up to 30% reductions at a time. This is completely new science. Like, there was scientific backing for this stuff years ago, but the guy doing the research here, it's only been like 6-7 years or so. So he hasn't done enough on this medication. And all of a sudden I had this full plan to taper and it worked. I didn't have any withdrawal symptoms after that. It was really gentle and I got off of it in about 6 months. And it was this amazing revelation. Like, I went through this hell and it stopped the hell. It made things work and it got me off the med. And now I'm doing fine. I have to retaper the first one, which is a pain in the butt, but I'm still working with ChatGPT on that. And especially where science is new and being developed and you don't have the full information, it can synthesize stuff together, put together studies and help you figure out, like, here's what we know and here's what we can figure out because of that. And without it, I don't know what I would have done because the doctor didn't have the knowledge. I eventually found a doctor who was familiar with the research. I showed him the plan and we talked through it and he agreed it made sense. So we worked through it. But if I hadn't found that doctor, I still would have been able to hopefully convince my other doctor to be able to taper in this way off the medication. One of the weird things it can cause too is problems with tendons. For some reason, the withdrawal can cause that. And I ended up tearing my Achilles shortly after. I didn't realize it. I worked with ChatGPT to figure out what this new ankle pain was. And it was like, I think you tore your Achilles a little at the base. I finally go to the doctor. He's like, Shoshana, you tore your Achilles a little bit at the base. I'm like, all right. So ChatGPT knows what it's doing. And I just love having it as an ally in these weird situations. I think like when I was a kid, when I was like 17, I figured out I had fibromyalgia from an internet forum. Doctors, like 25 doctors missed it. And this forum, this woman had said, hey, if you have endometriosis and you're getting sick all the time, like colds and infections, check out fibromyalgia. So I went to a rheumatologist. He's like, yep, you have fibromyalgia. Here's the medication. But if I had AI, I think I would have found it a lot faster. So this is deep and nerdy, but it's like, it puts so much power in your hands. I'm bad at math. I would not have been able to make that curve by myself or figure this stuff out by myself. But man, I was so thankful to be able to have it.
Shoshana, one of the things, first of all, it's remarkable that you've had that experience, and thank you for sharing those details of your story, because I think that in all of these political and policy debates we have as a state and a nation over AI, over technology, over data centers that provide the infrastructure for AI, it's really easy to sort of focus inadvertently on the negatives, on the fear, on the disruption and those kinds of things. And we should be clear-eyed about some of the genuine concerns or questions, but also we can't lose sight of the benefits of these kinds of things, that there's so much benefit that can come from this new technology. In fact, here at Sutherland Institute, we have a report called 25 Ways AI is Helping People Flourish, released in February of this year. We'll include the link in the show notes so folks can read that. But it goes through, it talks about how AI is helping make a difference in education, in government, in healthcare, in family life. It just kind of quick hits on all of these areas. And the last question I want to ask you before we go to another break is, for folks out there listening to this thinking, well, this makes sense. How do I use AI in my own life, either in my work or in my personal life in a way that's beneficial? And with the wrinkle, the question I want to ask is this idea of hallucinations or AI giving fake information that sometimes happens. So how do you balance sort of embracing AI as potentially a wonderful tool in work and personal life that can be a great resource for all of us, while also sort of answering the question, well, but how do I know when I can trust it? How do I know how to use it well? Any advice for our audience?
Yeah, just double check things. Like really, it comes down to that. Like every study it showed me for any medical information or even just like policy research, I always double check it. If it says a certain piece of information is in there, I'm like, okay, what's the quote? So I can go double check that quote. And every now and then it says, oh, that's not a real quote. I just made that up. With the medical thing, one of the big things it had was like, oh yeah, everyone in your shoes goes through this. I'm like, who's everyone in my shoes? Like, I can't imagine this happens a lot. And it's like, oh yeah, I don't have a site. I'm just assuming. So double check things, especially when it's important. You can, fly by if you're trying to figure out like broadly where things stand. But if you're planning on relying on something for medical or work or other information, always double check it.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to ask you about the need for infrastructure to support technologies like AI and policy reforms or policy decisions that can appropriately allow that infrastructure to progress. And we'll get into things like occupational licensing and just sort of tech regulation in general, and touch on some of those policy issues that our audience is likely seeing debated in the news and online. Again, all that and more right after this break. This is Defending Ideas. Don't go anywhere.
For a deeper dive into the issues you care about, read Sutherland Institute's official blog, Insights and Takeaways. You'll gain deep insights from policy experts and relevant takeaways voters need to know. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I'm Nic Dunn. We're going to continue our conversation with the Shoshana Weissmann of the Abundance Institute. Quick reminder, if you're enjoying this conversation, subscribe to Defending Ideas wherever you get your shows. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Just search for Defending Ideas on your favorite platform and click subscribe. You can also click the bell icon if you're watching on YouTube. That will give you a notification each time a new episode drops, which is every Tuesday morning. You You can also find us at defendingideas.org. Shoshana, I want to talk about some of the policy implications or questions around these issues of AI. If we assume that a lot of folks out there, are using AI or want to use AI in their work and their personal lives, there has been this question or this debate at times around the tech infrastructure for it. One thing that we've done some past conversations on the show about AI and data centers, for example. That's been a big area of debate. But I think a lot of folks may not realize that every time we do anything involving technology, if you're streaming a show on Netflix on your phone, if you're checking social media, there is a data center somewhere that's helping to process that information. So obviously, even though we can have a thoughtful debate and discussion about the right way to deploy things like data centers, but I want to focus on sort of the broader question about, we obviously need tech infrastructure, and we need infrastructure for things like AI. And one of the things I want to ask you about specifically is the need to build the kind of tech infrastructure that we will need as a country and as a society for AI. And one of the things that I've looked at in the past and have done some writing on, we published a report a while back on this topic, is this idea of workforce shortages in construction and the trades. And so I'm thinking, well, setting aside for a moment the bigger debate about data centers, if we're going to have data centers in some way, even if they're done thoughtfully, obviously, we need folks to build these. We need skilled tradespeople to have the capability to create what we need for the tech infrastructure. Any advice for policymakers that you would have facing that issue to say, well, how do we make sure that our public policy is structured in such a way that we can actually build the infrastructure we need?
Totally. I mean, a lot of it really does come down to electricity. Like, we need more energy. We need to, everyone loves permitting reform in my space, but we really do need permitting reform to make it easier to build energy. We need more geothermal and we need nuclear, and there's all that. And it's going well. Like, Governor Cox is doing really, really great work in the state building that. To the second point, too, his first executive order in office was occupational licensing reform, which I was very, very happy about. It was so cool to see. And he's been a leader on a lot of the issues that, I think even maybe before he realized we're going to enable AI, because back when he was elected, the big conversation wasn't around AI, but he was thinking licensing reform, and his administration has done really great work here. But, we need electricity for data centers. So more energy is important, but we also need the people. And about a year ago, I saw this article that the BlackRock CEO was like, man, we need way more electricians. And I'm like, I know why we don't have enough electricians. There's a very simple reason for this. So, occupational licensing laws generally have room for reduction. I'm not saying we get rid of the licenses, but in some cases, the requirements don't make sense, or they're overly burdensome, or there's not a good means-sense fit. One of the most surprising things I found out about years ago was that if you license electricians too hard, basically if you make it way too hard to become an electrician, rates of electrocution actually go up. And this was a Department of Labor study. And the reason is because they get too expensive. So people are like, all right, well, I can't find an electrician in my price range, so I'll just give it a shot. And then it doesn't go well. It's a problem. So, with all licenses, you have to think about not just the clear health and safety of, of course, we want someone trained doing electricity, but it also comes down to if those people aren't in high enough supply, what happens? And if that supply reduction is caused by laws, maybe we need to rethink how we do those laws. And one of the big problems, too, is that, especially in the trades, because data centers don't just need more electricians, they need plumbers and contractors and all kinds of trades like that. And you have big tech companies funding their training, which I think is a great way to handle things. But you also it's kind of silly to do that without also having some reform in law. But especially in eastern states, I've noticed a lot of licensing is handled at the local level. So in a lot of states, it's, you have a state electrician license or a state contractor license and subcontractor license types. But in New York, where I'm from, I spoke with my parents' plumber, and he needed 10, 20 licenses in order to operate in a relatively small area because it's all city level licensing. Same for Pennsylvania and a bunch of other states too. And the reason that's a problem isn't just because they need a lot of licenses. The reason is because you have a lot of new universal licensing recognition laws, which just means you can move to a new state and they'll recognize your license in many scenarios. It doesn't work if your license is local because the laws all say state license. So if you're an electrician moving from New York to Utah, you're kind of out of luck. So I've advocated for changing these laws to take into account local licenses. But one of the other interesting things is I looked at the best state I was able to find, and I think it was Pennsylvania. I did this last year for like electrocutions, rates of harm, things like that, in cities that did license electricians and cities that didn't. And there really wasn't much of a difference. Not saying we need to get rid of the licenses, but I think if the data goes in that direction, maybe we reduce some of the burdens. Maybe we make it easier to become an electrician and we make the paths there better. And it's great because it's high paying jobs that, people can get. And it's super useful, and there's going to be the need for those kinds of workers forever. And one other reason this is a problem is data centers often need traveling electricians. So the people kind of building and starting up different data centers will often need to go to different states to work. And if those licenses don't transfer, it's really hard on them. So we have this really rigid system. And assuming we're going to have data centers, it's just not a smart system for building out the economy like we need it to.
Shoshana, in the few minutes that we have left, I want to talk about the idea of regulation because, again, this technology, from my perspective, it has moved so quickly in some ways that I remember it felt like, I think it was just a few years ago, of sort of initially seeing some of the early things that ChatGPT could do. And now, of course, there's multiple platforms and so many different use cases and so many benefits of AI. But when folks are worried about the potential negative effects of sort of widespread adoption of this technology, what advice would you give? Maybe give us a sense of how do you interpret sort of the battle lines of the debate around AI regulation? Is there a role for any government regulation or not? If so, what should it be? If not, sort of how do you articulate to folks who might say, well, I'm excited, I'm also nervous, I don't know kind of what to make of the advent of AI. What's your read of the landscape, and what's the right framework you think for how we should balance protecting innovation in AI and keeping government in its proper role on this issue?
Yeah, so at the Abundance Institute, we're not opposed to more AI regulation. We just want it to be narrowly tailored to fixing a specific goal. And part of the problem is I think a lot of people who want more regulation on AI aren't taking into account that it's the things they're worried about are already illegal. Like fraud is already illegal. If you're using AI to do fraud, you're already doing something illegal. If you're using it to violate HIPAA, you're doing something illegal, or know your customer laws. Like all of those already apply. I could see there's also probably some room for tweaks around the edges there in real ways. Like today I was nerding on some know your customer laws for banks versus know your agent systemic frameworks, which are kind of interesting, and thinking like how that might need to change, or where laws or other frameworks might be needed. Sometimes, industry frameworks are able to take care of things, but it really depends. But there are new questions, I think. In so many cases, though, existing law applies. Like in almost every case I've seen existing law apply. I think one of the tough things, though, is because, like you mentioned before, like AI does hallucinate. It'll make up information. And you can't always control it. I'm not the best explainer on exactly why you can't control it, but functionally it's like a text prediction tool in a lot of cases. So like it's predicting text, and you can't always force it to tell what to predict in the future because it's not following the rules as easily as you'd like. But there are industry systems building out more guardrails for AI, but it does make it harder in regulated areas. Like if you're having a housing conversation and you want to say like, I want to move to an area of people of my religion or people of my race. Like that's something that an AI shouldn't be able to answer and shouldn't be able to help you with, but it can be difficult for it to overcome. But to that end, you have companies like Zillow creating this really interesting open source guardrail tools that other companies can adopt and put around their infrastructure. So it does a better job of like overcoming those kinds of challenges. So I actually think a good chunk of the leadership around problems like that may come from industry. And I'm not just saying, let's do self-regulation, but I actually think that in cases like these, it might be more effective because like the government mandating it versus like companies building it and figuring out what works and iterating it over time. They're going to make it better faster. And I think that that's something really exciting. I'm not usually super excited in life about regulatory compliance, but this is one where I think it's actually really, really interesting. And I think it's also important to have one framework. If we have lots and lots of different state frameworks, it can become impossible to comply. I've seen so many bills across different states that want to license different AI models for the same reason. So like 50 different licensed mental health models for AI. That's a lot of compliance, and it becomes difficult. And I think it's easier if you do things like that at the national level, and if you figure out what you want at the national level. Not to say states don't have a role. There's still a big role for states here, but I think it just becomes a lot more difficult. So those are kind of the big ways I think about this stuff. But the things that industries are doing through open source AI, like self-regulation, is some really, really interesting stuff that I can see a big future with overcoming some of the problems here.
Shoshana, in the brief time we have left, if you were to kind of leave a governor, a state legislature, legislative leadership, or a voter with kind of one key takeaway from this conversation, what's the one biggest, most essential thing that folks need to keep in mind when it comes to AI and tech, whether it's regulation or governance or the use in daily life? What's kind of the best framing comment to help us proceed thoughtfully and correctly as a state and as a nation when it comes to AI?
Well, I think it's that AI is going to do amazing things and enable people to do amazing things. And it's really, really important not to stop that. I've had wild uses of medical AI use, but you read stories and there's all these people with diseases where doctors weren't listening, and they got through to the AI, and the AI was able to help them talk to doctors. Like that's amazing. And I'm not down on doctors. I think there's really great doctors who sometimes don't know things outside their scope and can't keep up with like lots and lots of new medical information. In daily life, in organizing trips for your family, in automating parts of your work so you can go focus on other things. And there's going to be amazing things here. Even stopping cyber attacks. Like AI has huge promise, not just to cause cyber problems, but to also fix them. I think there's just amazing potential all over. And I think it's really important for lawmakers to think through what they're doing and make sure, they're considering things thoroughly, but not just the bad, considering the good too, and how their proposals will impact that for better or for worse.
Well, we will leave it there, like ending on a positive note. Obviously, the discussion continues on these issues, but thank you so much for being with us, Shoshana Weissmann from Abundance Institute.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're going to take one final break before we leave you all with some talking points from this conversation. This is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the latest policy debate that affects your life. The solution? Subscribe to Sutherland Institute's weekly newsletter, where you'll find in-depth insights from seasoned policy experts, compelling multimedia, and advance notice of special events. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back, and thanks again to Shoshana Weissmann of the Abundance Institute. There's really one key takeaway from this conversation that stands out to me. Our approach to AI in terms of public policy, work, and our personal lives should be largely optimistic, while being really thoughtful and targeted with our discussions of any concerns. That means recognizing the broad benefits that AI is already having across so many domains of modern life, as outlined in the Sutherland report that I mentioned during the discussion and that we'll link to in the show notes, while also being clear-eyed about any potential problems. That also means policymakers considering regulation of AI should keep any such efforts targeted on specific problems rather than driven by generalized fears. As with any new, potentially transformative technology, there will be changes we can't entirely predict or control. But if we take the attitude that we want the blessings of technological innovation, well, exercising prudence regarding any potential concerns will be much better for it. Well, that's it for this episode of Defending Ideas. If you enjoyed the discussion, please visit defendingideas.org, where you can access previous episodes and watch or listen on your favorite platform. Don't forget to subscribe to Defending Ideas on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you like to get your shows. And please share this episode with a friend, family member, or coworker who may find it valuable. Lastly, if you want to support the broad work of Sutherland Institute, if you want more conversations like this, please make a contribution at sutherlandinstitute.org/donate. Thanks again for joining us on Defending Ideas from the Sutherland Institute in Salt Lake City. I'm Nic Dunn. We'll see you next time.